I'm the Americas region foresight leader for a global engineering and design firm called ERA.
So we're very excited to join you all. We're going to share a little bit of context on the work that kind of is the foundation of this session. And then we're going to go into a bit of a breakout or more participatory of kind of receiving you all's input in the work that we're sharing. So
Skip over this for a second. We're going to come back to memory work. It's one of the reasons that I'm really excited that Macy is here with us. And we're going to have you guys kind of walk through a part of that future world in a really emotionally engaging way. But so I've been practicing foresight and futures practice for around 15 years, which is not a long time, but it's not a short time. But I'm trained as an architect, and so a lot of the kind of the ways of practice come from my experience in architecture. And so it's really about kind of thinking about things that matter at different levels of scale. So oftentimes when we're thinking about futures, we talk about things at the global scale. We talk about mass levels of urbanization. We talk about rising sea levels. We talk about shifting patterns of biodiversity. But what that really, really does is it makes it kind of challenging for folks to say, okay, what does this mean for me? How do I actually tap into this future? How do I do something about it? Where's my sense of agency? The emotional engagement piece becomes a little bit lacking in that space. And so for me, a lot of this is to kind of come from a place to say, how do we make these visions and stories around the future more tangible? And kind of reckon with the fact that we're not starting with a blank slate, right? Our cities are inherited, our policies are inherited. We are making changes, but we all have computers in our pockets, but at the same time, we're still moving through buildings that have probably been here for 50, 100, longer than that, depending on where you live, right? Years. And so how do we start to kind of reckon with these versions of futures that are not the sexy, shiny, blank slate futures where we do have to think about context, and we do have to think about our histories, and we do have to acknowledge the memories of places before and the stories we have with them. So this first project is a design fiction film that was created by my colleagues on the Foresight team in the London office. It's called Abundance, and it's a day in the life of a regenerative designer in a near future in London. And what I really love about this is there are parts of this project that are very of the future, right? She has her glasses that provide like an AR overlay on top of her environment. She's using these gestural kind of hand motions to be able to do her work. But at the same time, you see the kind of like graffiti on the wall behind her, the greenery that's just kind of growing wild in parts of London. And what we're really asking folks to think about is, what does it look like to just wake up in the morning and make breakfast in your kitchen and take your bicycle to work and put your helmet on and then have a meal with friends? Because chances are most of that doesn't change, right? And so when we get past this idea that like technology is the shiny thing or that our world's going to be drastically different, what futures are we really talking about? This is another project that we did, and again, this was really about, it has a different tone. This was from my time at Autodesk, which is a technology company based in San Francisco, and they make tools for people in the media and entertainment industry, in the architecture and engineering and construction industry, and product design and manufacturing. And what we were really thinking about was, how do the tools start to look in context outside of our Silicon Valley labs? So what does it look like if we are using tools and technology to help rehabilitate or rebuild a village in a hillside in a place that feels like Nepal, right? Is that even feasible? Is that something culturally that the people who live there and have been there for ages would even need or welcome? Is it our place to be there, right? What happens in an island place like Puerto Rico, maybe, where they've just been hit by a hurricane or a tropical storm? Or what does it feel like in a Midwest city in the United States, where somebody has perhaps lost their job to automation, right? These are very, very real stories. And what we're really trying to say is, when we bring it down to the local context and the personal experience, what does it actually look like? What does it actually mean? And the thing here for me was that we created these stories that were meant to kind of feel like news articles from these near futures. And it was really meant to kind of drive emotional engagement. You were, again, supposed to be kind of placing yourself in this vision of this potential future, but the scenarios themselves are meant to be prototypes of possible futures. They're not the end product. I never see scenarios as like the finished thing that I give you. It's the model you get to use to break apart, to turn upside down, to flip on its head, to say, is this something I want? Are there bits and pieces of this I really like or resonate with? And are there pieces of this that we might want to augment? So again, kind of in the same way that we might think about the architectural context with an architectural model, the thing you get is not the thing you build, right? It's the thing you start with. And then finally, kind of thinking about how do we take these really global drivers of change and make them more tangible, make them feel more humane in the ways we talk about them. This was a project that I did in my personal practice, and it was a series of wild card scenarios, thinking about things like, what if there are no more fish in the sea, or what if we have massive levels of swarming in cities? What does it feel like to have to make a grocery run in the morning, right? So we created these absurd artifacts like this bird suit that's meant to like ward off birds. It's not necessarily functional or useful, but it begs the question: is this something you want? Right? Like, do you want to have to put some kind of PPE on just to get out your door to go get groceries? And then we did a project about what if there are no more fish in the sea as part of the Lisbon Architecture Triennale, and it was along the same vein as that, where it doesn't really mean anything when you're talking about what if there are no more fish in the sea. But we did this project where we kind of recreated a cooking ritual around the story of stone soup, which is this like communal act of making soup together. Everyone, for the most part, has some version of it in their culture. And what we really found and what was really compelling was, one, we were able to engage a lot of different kinds of folks. The kids playing soccer down along the beach, folks who had come for the Triennale itself. But the thing that really struck me was the grandmas that came, and one, were making sure our soup was good. But also they said, you know what really scares them about this is if there's no more fish in the sea, they can't cook the seafood dishes that have been passed down to them from their families, and they don't have the chance to then share that ritual of cooking with their children and grandchildren, and they lose that moment for cultural exchange. So they lose that moment where they would talk about, you know what, this is what my childhood was like, or this is why we cook fish in this way, or this is what your grandfather did when he caught this really big fish. We did this in a seaside village outside of Lisbon. And so, there's this tension between those global drivers of change and really thinking about what is the emotional engagement aspect of this, and that's really where we start to become transformative.
Amazing. Like, so much amazing work was shared, and I'm excited to dive a little bit. But for one, to start off and kind of take a step back, because the work that you all have done is significant already. And I think for a lot of us in the room, everyone has done very significant work, but I think the work that you all have done of thinking of, how did you even get here? Like, what were you thinking about before you even entered this world? When did you discover, speculative design and futures work?
So, like I said, my way into this was through architecture. I studied in New Orleans. I was working on my master's when Hurricane Katrina hit, and it was kind of a very, it was an awakening as to what good design can do and how it can either help people thrive or not. And it kind of, after that experience, I really started to think about, well, what were architects and designers 100 years ago thinking about when they were planning the city? Did they anticipate a 100-year storm at the time? And at that time, it was a 100-year storm. We didn't have this like frequency of natural disasters as we did, and we've only seen that change really in the last 20 years. And so for me, it really became a preoccupation to think about buildings as future artifacts, because they truly are that. When you put something in the ground, it becomes this machine, and it has to be able to adapt and change to the ways that the city and people will evolve around it and work through it, right? So even this building we're in today, is this the building we will need in 50 years? I don't know, right? And that's a question we should be asking ourselves. Who is this preferable for, right? What do we hope to leave behind and for whom? And so I really got into things like the paper architecture movements, speculative design movements of like the 50s and 60s and 70s, Archigram, Super Studio, Ant Farm, the Metabolist movement, where they were really thinking about what else could architecture be if it's not a building? What else could architecture do if it's not planted in the ground? And it was through that that I kind of found my way into future studies. And then through a series of like meandering paths that I think was very confusing to like my very immigrant Indian family, I like moved to London, decided to go to art school, didn't do architecture anymore, and found a path to Air to the Foresight team, and essentially kind of apprenticed my way into future. So there are paths that are more formal, where you go to university and you study foresight or future studies or speculative design, that didn't feel as accessible to me at the time that I was in school. And I think it's absolutely valid to kind of just study it in the field and have the mentorship of people who are really willing and open to share what they know.
I think there's something really special about the fact that both of you have had a background in the arts and then also are immigrant. And I think there's something there of you're able to study the way that we live and question it, as opposed to kind of taking advantage of, our lifestyles. And so I think there's a role, what you have all found very successfully is there's a role that art plays in future design in a way where it can be difficult with a lot of the professions in this room of figuring out how do you find a metric to identify its impact. And so I wonder what tips would you all be able to give the people in this room of how can we use uselessness, play, to create, to motivate and value that impact that comes from being artistic, but also being design oriented.
You know what's funny is like every conversation I've ever had about foresight, there's always a question about metrics. And the thing is with, at least in my experience, this might not be true for everyone, but in my experience, the metrics are not quantitative. And what you end up with is actually these like anecdotal kind of artifacts. So, at an example I will give is like at Autodesk, we did a series, like this major foresight program where we were thinking about what is Autodesk's take on the change that will happen over the next 10 years and what drivers are they really wanting to prioritize as part of their business. And one of the things that really popped up for them was a focus on water, right? And I think that's something that's probably should be a major focus for every single person in this room, regardless of what region of the world you come from, and whether there's too much water or not enough. We're all grappling with it right now. But what ended up coming from that is it informed their corporate development kind of investment portfolio. And what they ended up doing was acquiring a water infrastructure company that they could then incorporate into their tools to help assess, to help engineers, architects, construction companies assess where are the best places to build in the future when we think about too much or too little water, right? So the foresight program itself, the workshop might have felt maybe silly in moments. We might have asked folks to really kind of get out of their kind of everyday thinking about KPIs and what fits into a spreadsheet. And believe me, that's a big part of my life as well. But it was really saying like, suspend disbelief for a moment, open yourself to the realm of possibility. Be willing to think about things that might not make sense in this moment, where you can't pull it back to a goal you have or the way you're being measured in this moment by your leaders or your directors, or if you are the directors, by your board or your company. And sometimes that leads to opportunities for growth that we might not have even envisioned, right? It's what ensures us to kind of be around for 25, 50, maybe 100 years, right? And so I think that is just like a really, really important thing to take, is to be open to the realm of possibility and the things we don't understand. And foresight gives us sometimes permission to do that. I think the last thing I'll say on that, I know we can move on, is like, does it make you feel something enough to want to do something about it? And I think that is, Julian Bleeker of Near Future Laboratories, he does a lot of work with design fiction. And he'll often say that his metric of success is, did his work make someone smile? And I just love that. I love that that's something that feels like it's enough for him in a world where we are measuring everything all the time. And so yeah, it's, does it make you feel something, whether it's uncomfortable or whether it's not? It's Does it make you feel something?
Another one I have, you said this earlier, out of we are designing not with a blank slate. So much has been predetermined and pre-designed. And then also seeing that image of the person standing in front of graffiti and using architecture as a form of blank slate. And we had a conversation this morning of you can be someone that designs the built environment and create a table inside of a space, and someone might use it in an entirely different purpose. So there's a role of agency that's very significant in designing our own futures, whether we look at a blank slate and decide, do you look at the built environment as a blank slate for us to bring ourselves, or just exist in the way that it's been designed for us? So I wonder how you all think about agency. Like, how do we inspire people to have more agency in the way that they exist within the world, where they use the world as a blank slate as opposed to just existing in the way that it is?
For our practice, and I'll speak within the Arab context, I think that's where translating things down to human scale becomes really important. So Arab, for those of you who don't know, we operate globally. We have 90 offices around the world. We do everything from highways and railways to hospitals and major university campuses. You've probably seen an Arab project, our big landmark one that really kind of brought a bit of fame to the organization was the Sydney Opera House. But even in those moments, even in those projects, we still find ways to bring the experience down to human scale. So we have things like the Sound Lab, where we will bring folks into a simulation space where they can truly feel and hear what it might feel like to be in a building or a huge auditorium, depending on where they're standing in that space. Or what it might feel like if drones are coming above you and you're standing at a street corner, maybe in New York City, with autonomous vehicles whizzing past you. Is that a future you want? Do you want that soundscape? Does that feel preferable to you? Does it feel comfortable? But it's really about bringing things down from that 30,000 foot view to the human scale, to where we say, what does this really feel like for you? What does it mean for you? And then working our way back up to the kind of massive infrastructure scale.
There's so many questions I would love to ask the both of you, but I want to open it up if anyone else has any other questions. And you also have cards that were given to you and pens where you can write answers to the questions that we have for you. One being your response to the soundscape that was just presented, and also a couple other on thinking about yourself as a future ancestor and what actions you might want to take considering the future.
Are we doing enough right now to prepare our kids and our grandkids for that future? It makes me think about the education system. It makes me think about our urban development. And it took me to so many different places to be out. But like that one center question, like, are my kids ready? That's the one key thing.
Hi, I'm Tom Myers. I'm an osteopath and body-centered stress coach from Belgium. And of course, what you were saying is the topic that I'm concerned about. So when we have feelings, when we have emotions, when we think about the future, our body responds to that. And of course, we have to include that body work within our imaginations of the future, of our architecture of the future, that our body stays within a framework of ease where we have the necessary capacity to think, and we have the capacity to also have the necessary vascularization in all the different parts of the brain, so that we don't go into that stress response, right? Because that stress response changes the way we think, changes our behavior, changes our time perception, right? Because stress is all about now. So when we want to take ourselves and our children, that we must make sure that we take our bodies also with us on the journey. Now, in terms of that, and the future generations, I have another idea about that, because the next generation, we think about our children. Now, some cultures, and I'm teaching osteopathy in India, and they believe in reincarnation. So the future generation is maybe me from that culture. So how am I thinking about not only about the children, but do I have to start also thinking from maybe the future is my future in 100 years? How do I want that future to look like? Because today, to my decisions, choices, and actions, I have an influence. So, it's great to talk about feelings and emotions, but I am always thinking, yes, but most people, they're so stressed today because of the changes, of the speed of change that is overwhelming, because our biology is in conflict with our environment. Our biology has a stress response that has become a stressor itself. And without putting technology within our bodies, because then our future is game over, in my sense, because it will change DNA and that is going to be transferred. It is about also from how do we make, let's say with Thomas Lombardo, maybe some people have read his book, Future Consciousness. How do we become more mindful in a way of ourselves, or in the sense that I say evolopsis, how do we evolve on purpose to make those dreams, those sounds? And I think it's very important. I had not really thought about that, but bringing into that as well, feelings as our primary sense. So I all want you to think about that from whatever you do, all your dreams, your body is always part of every single scenario of the future.
Thank you for the soundscape and all of the wonderful thoughts. Coming into this room from some other rooms, I automatically feel like a different sense of, there's just like a different energy in the room, especially that's in part due to all of your work and your personalities and the vibe you've created. So I'd love to hear more about, in that soundscape, you asked us to close our eyes. A lot of times constraints bring creativity. So how does multisensorial expression and experiences play out in your work? And what do you think the value is of bringing multisensorial experiences to futures and foresight strategy even?
I'll try to keep it short because I know we have to end, but I think to your point, our bodies come with us in the future and we have to remember them, and the ways that we will experience the world will still hopefully, I hope, will be through our sense of touch and our sense of sight and our sense of smell and all of those things. And I had mentioned, at Arup, we do a lot with sound design and bringing people into kind of these like immersive audio experiences as well. But I think that's the way we've always made sense of the world, and that's something that it's not enough to me to kind of just provide a one-dimensional kind of way into a scenario. In the same way that, like, if I were to present you with a building, I wouldn't just give you the structural system, right? I would also give you the cladding and the glazing and the everything, right? The interior finishes and hopefully what's happening externally with the landscape, all of that, right? So it's kind of like, the thing about foresight and what we get to do is kind of amplify certain aspects of the experience, but it's never meant to be purely in a vacuum. We might ask you to take a moment with something in a vacuum, but at the end of the day, what we're really asking you to think about is that wider ecosystem. So I hope that as we continue into this, that we kind of find ways to continue to be in our bodies. And the one thing I will say as someone who practices foresight and futures is also take a break from it. I take a break from thinking about futures and uncertainty and change because you need to stay present sometimes just to maintain your sanity.
Thank you both. This was so important and caring, the work that you all are doing. And thank you all for joining us.